I am lost inside and I am burning to untangle the knots.
I'm so pleased to be here tonight with Reverend Colin Amato, Tira Keel, soon to be Reverend Tira Keel, and Alex Gayhart for our conversation tonight on the LGBTQIA world of identity and all of the pieces and bits of that: love, gender, marriage, sexuality, and specifically how this part of our human family and our human identity connects with this invitation to be a new church, to become a new church. And these topics have been inspired by Helen Keller. We started with gender equity. We spoke about racism because she was living the life of the new church and was like, okay, this is coming. And let's be honest about all of the ways we are not getting it right in the world. And there's so many ways we're not getting it right. The way women are treated, the way people of color are treated. And, you know, the LGBTQIA world wasn't quite as visible. It certainly existed in her time, but it wasn't it didn't have as much attention. So it wasn't something she really spoke explicitly about. Although it's interesting because a lot of queer authors speak of her as a kind of a female icon and kind of a lesbian icon in a way, because she spent her life with women. She didn't have a male partner, although she did fall in love and want to get married and was kept from that. But that's a story for another day. But she was someone who did not conform to any particular role based on her gender. So anyway, we feel confident that if she were alive today, she would want to be a part of this conversation, and she would want to be a part of making more room for the diversity of our human family in the world. So that's the topic for tonight: how we can better celebrate and understand queerness in the human family, how we can be better at nurturing it in our personal lives and in our life of the church, and what it might be teaching us about love. I'm going to say one more anecdote, and then I'm going to open it up to all of you. But I know for me, when marriage equality was really live in the 2000s, I was always like, why could the state tell me that I couldn't marry someone? Like, it's my job as a minister to bless love and bless relationships, and you're going to tell me there's only certain people I can marry? Like, that's a religious freedom issue. And it's interesting that it's often couched the other way, that churches want to limit it. But I would say, at least for me and my understanding of what it means to be a minister, that's a part of my calling, right? Is to bless love where I find it. So all of you come to the Swedenborgian tradition sort of from different corners, and you have different experiences. And you, Colin, and Tira are both focused on bringing into the world kind of LGBTQIA focused ministries, but from different corners of the church, different angles of the community. And then Alex, of course, you work with me in the collaborative and always bringing that lens into our work. I wonder what you might like to say about specifically, maybe starting with Colin and Tira, the call to create a community that focuses on, I guess, here's my question. If we were further along, would we not need a LGBTQIA church? What is it about having a ministry focused on that you really feel is kind of vital and alive right now?
Well, I'm Reverend Colin, and I'm the minister of the Rainbow Church of the New Jerusalem, the virtual community that started off with the intention of being a safe virtual space for queer spiritual seekers, wanting a space for people to join without the limitation, or, recognizing geography being a factor and really trying to combat isolation. That's really something that I took really seriously when I first moved back to Solano County, and I live in Vallejo, California. And what I found paradoxical about being here in Vallejo is that there are more churches in this town. I mean, I'm telling you, you could throw a stone and there's a church. Almost every major denomination, including Greek Orthodox, is represented here in this, small city in the North Bay. But what I found is that there is a local queer community, and those folks really didn't feel at home in any of those churches. And yet they were hungry for spirituality, whether it was talking about it or even the idea of getting together in community and breaking bread intentionally, or engaging in worship. And so, just recognizing the reality that's local to me while simultaneously wondering, well, what about those folks that are in, West Virginia that maybe feel isolated and needing conversation and support. And so that was a really big motivating factor for me to start my ministry.
And you name a very blatant truth that I think I don't want to acknowledge is that the church in general has not been a safe place, and still remains in many corners of the world not a safe place for queer people. I despise that fact. So I don't often acknowledge that it's true, but that's part of what's needed right now. And even perhaps in churches that are maybe really trying to be welcoming, do you think there's still something about the queer experience that makes it difficult for people to really feel welcome in that space? Do you have any sense of that, Colin?
Yeah, what I've heard from folks is that even though they may see like a rainbow flag outside and the congregation is saying we're open and affirming, we support everyone here, what happens is that a queer person might go into that space and there's no initial hostility. In fact, people are friendly. Coffee hour is friendly. But one thing, that they notice is that in the worship service, for example, there's no reference made to queer folks. Like, in other words, the queer experience, I guess, could be summarized as we're not going to be hostile towards you, but we're not going to acknowledge you as well. It's a very strange paradox. And so I've talked to a lot of folks who say that, yeah, I mean, objectively, they had a good experience in church, but they had no reason to feel motivated to maybe go back, or that nothing was really calling them as a queer person to exist in the space or to be acknowledged. And so I think that is, I'm glad that there are spaces that are saying we're not going to cause harm and we want you here, but still feeling ignored and sidelined, I think has been a pretty consistent experience for a lot of folks that I've spoken to.
Yeah, that difference between you're welcome to join us and do what we're doing versus you're welcome and we want to know you and we want to include you and we want our space to grow, to mirror and reflect you and celebrate you. That's a whole different animal. It's an exciting one, I think, but it's not maybe as common because it requires a lot more effort and work. So there's that effort of really molding a community with a lot of diversity. And then there's the effort like what you're doing of we're just right of the way, we are serving LGBTQIA community. And is there something kind of special about that particular, like that we're going to prioritize you, like we're going to hold you central? And I wonder if it feels like that's pretty important in the world still, perhaps because of all of the harm that occurs. How do you center LGBTQIA humans in the Rainbow Church? What are some of the most important things you think to centering that experience?
Oh, an intentional rewriting of the liturgy. For an example, I remember Jim Lawrence saying, salvation by publication. We care very much about words, right? We talk a lot about the writings and the word, and language is so important. So I like to just make no apologies and just say, speaking about queer people very intentionally in the liturgy, not abandoning traditional language. I still like to use divine and even mention Jesus Christ, but just acknowledging the harm that has been caused by being exposed to liturgies that are just kind of hitting you over the head with traditional language. And so I'm really trying to reword and rewrite the Sunday liturgy. And so I've noticed that I'm playing around with it right now. So it's kind of a hybrid of still using the traditional book of worship language, but also intentionally putting in whole sections that are queer. And I just think that that's really important.
So the words, making sure that the words of the liturgy, and I read a lot of your publications. It's the Rainbow Church, so all of the ways that you're advertising is centering queer people. And then in what you're speaking about is centering the queer experience. I wonder for you, Tira and Alex, when you think about feeling safe in a community, feeling like you belong, is it words? What are some of the other things that we do to kind of shift the dynamic so that there really is this sense of welcome for a person who's queer?
That's such a good question. I wanted to shout out your affirmation of worship, Colin. I absolutely love it. And I think context makes such a big difference, right? Because where I'm sitting, I'm seeking to serve right outside Brynäthen, right on the doorstep of a massive congregation of Swedenborgians who don't ordain women and they don't welcome LGBTQ. And so I'm hoping to set up shop and have a space and a physical building covered in pride flags. And I'm really interested to see what will come of that. And it's more a giant question mark and theory than any proof. So part of the motivation was becoming really aware of the kids that are in like my kids' generation that are more and more frequently out. They're known as LGBTQ, and it's a variety of levels of acceptance, right? I'm not aware of any kids that have been kicked out of their homes. Now, that doesn't mean there haven't been. I'm just not aware of any. But none of my kids come to church, and several of them are queer. I know for a fact from having been their mom and watched them do this, that's a huge piece of it. It's like, why would I show up and participate with an organization that doesn't acknowledge my existence as valid, right? And so I am so appreciating, Colin, what you're saying about building it into the liturgy and fronting it. And now I'm like, okay, here's another way to be very mindful about this because I'm seeking to minister to anybody, right? Because there's lots of people in this area as well that feel out of step because of the lack of women in the pulpit. And I get to fulfill that piece of it all by my little self. So anyway, I'm seeking to have those wide open doors. I feel like I'm going to wind up somewhere between this church is for you LGBTQ folks and you're welcome here, but we're not, fronting you in everything. So I sort of want to find out if I can split the difference, right? And make it clear that everyone is welcome here. Everyone is welcome here, right? And I'm excited and nervous and really interested to see what comes of it.
It's sort of like centering the least of these, like Jesus would center that. So it's like, can you have a community? And I've certainly known them, like Glide Memorial or some churches that really center the queer experience, but it's a very robust community with people of different identities. And I think there are people who are very comfortable in that setting. And it only works if you center the queerness because you're battling such a long 1,000-year tradition that has not centered the queerness, right? That has not put that front and center. And the assumption is it isn't going to be front and center unless it is. Like it almost has to come first.
Yeah.
What are some things for you, Alex, that help you to feel safe in community?
Definitely words matter, rainbow colors, all those things. And it does have to be explicit, like hearing language where it's not always he, she is said, that, not always man, woman in a marriage, those sorts of things, that everything gets woven in allows a person to feel like they're being seen. And other things like if there's a restroom there, or if you have two restrooms, let's not gender either of them. Let's have menstrual products in both bathrooms. Like all of those sorts of things are going to make somebody who is queer or gender nonconforming feel like, okay, this place is really making an effort to make me feel safe and to make other people feel safe who aren't fitting this binary cisgender heterosexual mold that is assumed. And if we want to start having diverse communities, then we have to stop acting like there's a template. And if you don't fit the template, yeah, you're okay here, but you're just visiting. You're a welcome guest, but you're not part of the crew or the group. That I think we have to work really hard to make sure that people realize they are welcome, like truly welcome.
I keep thinking of the ramp, like with disability access. It's like everybody can walk up a ramp. So why don't we just build the ramp and then everybody's needs are met? And I think that's the same is true for how we make spaces accessible for queer people. Is like everybody can use an any gender bathroom, but to not make it like this is a special thing for the person who sort of doesn't quite fit. We're going to make an accommodation for just you. It's like, how can we create accommodations for everyone that just create an atmosphere where we're all welcome? I'm wondering about sexuality and how that plays out in the welcome. Sexuality is not a topic that is very common in religious spaces to like talk about or to name. That's another sort of long-standing history of what it means to be church, as we don't often want to go there. And I wonder about going there. I mean, it's such a primary part of the human experience, right? It's very important for the future of our species. And more than that, for, pleasure and love and joy. I mean, all the things that we associate with the divine giving us these gifts. And certainly within the Swedenborgian tradition, we have this beautiful theology of sexuality being something that continues unto eternity. And it makes people uncomfortable. I certainly have been in plenty of spaces with with people who are not quite wanting to talk about it or to even think about a person as being a sexual being. I think that's one of the things that plays out with ministers in the robe. Like, let's just hide my humanity as much as possible so I can speak for God who doesn't have, genitalia. And I don't know. I wonder what your sense is of creating spaces that are safe for us to be sexual beings and safe sexual beings. And actually, I'm thinking this might be one of our break-off groups is I'm so interested in sexuality and consent. And I think it's actually something that the queer community really talks about in a great way that I think everybody needs to talk about. I think part of the reason we don't talk about sexuality is because it is ugly. It is a place where we perpetuate harm on each other. And some of that harm is written into the biblical text, right? There has been harm in our human family through that. And we just don't really want to go there. But when I've been in very queer spaces, I feel like I can go there and it is a safe place to talk about it. And I love that. And I would love to see more religious spaces being places where, and everyone has a different feeling of safety or what's okay. I wonder if that's come up in any of your work or if that's something that you all think about in terms of making spaces safe to talk about sexuality or to bring that into the conversation in ways that are safe, in ways that respect people's boundaries. And anyway, that's a big question, but does it spur any thoughts from any of you?
Well, I do have one thought, which is I think that might be part of the reason that the queer community feels a little threatening to the heterosexual community, because as soon as people are recognizing someone as queer, it's sort of like the mind goes to, and I wonder what they,
What does that look like? Right.
All those sorts of things that
Yeah.
people don't think when it's a heterosexual couple,
Yeah.
right? It's just like, we don't even have to go there. We know what happens and we're
Right.
not even imagining it,
Right. Right.
So it just sort of puts it right in people's faces, even though it's not what the queer community is doing. They're not purposefully being overtly sexual at heterosexuals, but just their existence of doing things differently that causes those thoughts to come into other people's heads. So it's often the queer community is going, why are you wondering what's in my pants? Why are you wondering what I'm doing with people all the time? That's why. It's just not the tried and true path that allows everybody to pretend sex doesn't exist if that's what they want to do.
I think that's really true. And I see that as one of the reasons I see the LGBTQIA community as like part of bringing about the new church. Like it's where we are seeing more of the humanity, and there is a little bit of discomfort because we're being pushed out of it's just this way. And so I don't even need to give it any consideration. But it's highlighting, I think, just the general discomfort we have with sexuality in our world, which my sense, because of that, lots of harm gets perpetuated. We don't have to go there today. That's maybe a whole other Be Honest conversation.
Well, I think you're right that this could spin off into its own discussion evening for sure. I'm just thinking about, not to dive into the harms, but one of the struggles is when you have a congregation like the one I'm right outside of in Bernathen that has really successfully denied the existence of LGBTQ, and that once you're an adult, you sort of are let in on, or as you age and you learn about LGBTQ, it's in the context of, and it's bad, right? Without having well, let's talk about it and demystify it and understand it. Like, none of that happens. And so it's that thing of, you're teaching prejudice, you're teaching homophobia, and not because you're blatantly doing so, just by going, we don't talk about that, right? And so I'm thinking about how many people I will be hopefully trying to help desensitize and sort of have these conversations of, I understand why now you can't stop thinking about what they do at night. And also, it's no more your business than heterosexual couples you already know. So take a breath and just accept that and cope with that. And let's talk about that here outside of socializing at coffee hour.
Yeah.
Let's process that together so that now you can come and be normal with people. Because I like to talk about it in the terms of, there's an environmental learning disability that's been given to so many people because they weren't given an opportunity to normalize just another way of being human. And so they have this internalized bias that's going to be a handicap for them as they just try to move through the world and be normal with other normal people who happen to be queer. So anyway, that's
Yeah.
what I'm thinking about. For years, I've done marriage support work, and thus far, it's always been in a heterosexual context. And I'm simultaneously intimidated by and excited about the opportunity to do relationship or marriage support groups with queer representation there as well. Also, extremely aware of like, hey, who wants to come be the guinea pig couple? Like, that just is a huge ask. And so I'm sitting here going, this will be really interesting to navigate this territory. And I feel like I'll be like, what can I offer you to make this worth your while? Because you like, let me know. Let me say up front, you're guinea pigs.
Somebody's got to be
Sorry.
first. So I remember the first wedding I did, and they were kind of delighted that they were my first, and I was nervous. And I'm sure someone will be happy to take that position with you. And I like that you've named that, like, as we said, this was not a topic that Helen Keller spoke about. She was alive 100 years ago. Like, it has not actually been that much time that these conversations have become really public and really central to anybody's mind. I think I forget about that too. I sort of want to believe we're further along than we are. So I think you bring up a good point that there is a process. Part of being in this terrain of seeking to create more welcome spaces and build more relationships is navigating discomfort and navigating all kinds of barriers to understanding that exist. What's your experience with navigating those boundaries, Colin? Because I imagine you do it publicly, you do it in Rainbow Church. I know you're a counselor as well.
Mm-hmm.
What can you bring to that education? I don't even know what the word you use.
Yeah, I guess for me, I feel like the radical sort of perspective of having representation and normalizing, queer sexuality and not hiding it and not apologizing for it, and I feel like it's sort of this balance of knowing context, knowing time and place. But I just found myself thinking about like William Blake, for an example, in his artwork and the celebration of the human body. And shout out to Devin Zuber for showing me one of the classes that I took from him, which was a special reading course called Queering Swedenborg in Blake and homosexuality. And just looking at some of these like not very well-known sketches of his where they're pretty erotic in nature. And so thinking about how he celebrates the human body and the human experience as divine and as spiritual. And so he makes sexuality spiritual and elevates it, right? So I feel like in our Abrahamic tradition, it's either sex is for reproduction, begat, 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 or it's completely like shameful or evil. Like the result is David lusting after someone else's wife, or the result of doing this act means, obliteration of a whole city. And those are really extreme choices, either reproduction or destruction. And so it's like, where's the celebration? But thinking about consent and thinking about respect also for the human body, but just naming that sexuality can be sacred. And I think it's in our religious traditions. I just think a lot of folks, maybe because of the discomfort, shy away from it.
Sure. I'm with you, Colin. And maybe this is a good example of there's so much work still to be done to bring the queer experience into the world. And there's different work to be done. And Tira is doing different work living outside of Bernath. In some ways, it feels like you're really ministering to your home church, right? To your community of people who are suffering. And you're really wanting to build bridges and make space. That's a different kind of ministry than maybe I would get to do in San Francisco or the Tenderloin. But that all of those different efforts are useful and they can be different, and that's okay. We can be collaborating with all of our differences because there are probably some communities that really are ready to talk about sacred sexuality. And I'm kind of one of them. I want to talk about sacred sexuality. I want to talk about consent because I do. And again, this will be probably another podcast because this is not just about queerness. Our human family needs to know about consent. And it's more about violence and care and equity, what we want to have. Like you named that great binary of either it's procreative or it's sinful. And it's like, no, there's this beautiful array of things in between that we can enjoy when we are in right relationship with each other and when we're being loving and honest and useful, when we're telling the truth and drawing boundaries and saying what we need. But not everybody's ready to go there. Other people are just ready to build communities where they can come to coffee hour and be in community. And spirituality is a process, right? It's a growing process, and we got to meet people where they are because people are all over the spectrum right now. So sexuality, we talked about. What about marriage? Can we get into marriage a little bit more? You brought up being excited about shepherding couples. We do have gay marriage in the world now, although it's being threatened all over the place. There's also certainly many people within the queer community who are maybe not interested in marriage, or at least in a binary marriage. There's polyamory. There's all kinds of different arrangements of relationship. I think I'm bringing up marriage specifically in terms of the role of blessing relationship, which is a thing we do in the church, right? We bless people. We honor sacred occasions, and we honor commitment, and we honor the way in which people show up for each other in a sacred relationship. There's not really a question in there, but some gay people want to get married, some don't, right? There's not like one right or wrong way to do that.
Yeah. Well, I was going to add, there's aromantic and asexual people as well.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean they don't want to have deep, meaningful relationships, right? And yet there's no support group for people who want to have deep, meaningful relationships that are not sexual nor romantic. I just had a thought the other day about, those funny videos you'll see people make of like, if people made friends, like if grownups made friends like preschoolers. Hey, do you want to be friends? Yeah. What's your favorite color? And it just had me thinking maybe it would be a small group that could be how to make friends, right? And whether that would be a group that could be useful that, verged on and got into really deep work of how to be in relationship with others. Here's the one where we're going to talk about sexuality, and here's the one where we're going to talk about friendship and boundaries. And, I think we underappreciate our non-romantic relationships in the world in general. And how can we lift that up? How can we both recognize those romantic relationships as wonderful and blessed and validate all the rest of the relationships that we have? Anyway, that's sort of a tangent from the marriage question, but I do think, especially again in the context where I'm serving, the joke is that in the general church denomination, it's salvation by marriage alone. And of course, that's heteronormative, heterosexual marriage. And so I'm anticipating ministering to people and caring for people who are coming from this place of, well, I'm broken if I'm not attracted to the opposite sex and interested in making a lifelong commitment and an eternal commitment to that person of the opposite sex, right? There's so much baggage that comes with that. And yeah, it feels a little bit like the Wild West to me right here, right now. And so I feel like I need to like immerse myself in what you folks have been doing in SCNA for years now.
I think we're still figuring it out. And I don't think it was tangential for you to bring up friendship, because I'm also sort of in that bandwagon of, I think the church kind of overemphasizes this was actually part of my kind of crash in 2021. It's like, I can put on a great wedding and I like marrying people, but it's one day, 20 minutes, it's more about the lifetime of the relationship. And obviously we put on a pedestal marriage and then you're fulfilled. Whereas to me, the divine marriage that Swedenborg's talking about is much more about internal union and then how you live in relationship with everybody, and yes, you may choose a partner to make a specific commitment to, and maybe it's eternal, like he says. And there are so many different ways to be in relationship. And it feels like part of this is lifting that up and finding a way to bless that, to celebrate that without idealizing one over another, but honoring all the different ways that we love each other, right? Relationships is so important. It's so vital to our well-being and our spiritual lives. And there's some terrain to clear for that to happen, because again, it's always been, well, no, you're looking for the partner and then it's fulfilled. But clearly our world is showing us evidence that that's not necessarily the path to perfect happiness and fulfillment, right? With the divorce rate and all the other things we know about marriage.
Yeah, my thought about it is that marriage has been used by society and government and religion to control people.
Yeah.
to reward some people and keep privileges away from other people. I'm for the idea of decoupling all of that. And I think it's great that people have celebrations about their relationship or they're making whatever commitment it is that they want to make, but that it be very personal and not defined by somebody else what it means, but it's what they mean to each other and what they're promising to do together or try to do together for however long they want to. Because I think part of the big reason that there was, this fight for marriage equality is because so much was attached to if you were married. Now you got to be in the room that this person is dying. Now you get to be a part of their benefits, all those sorts of things. It's just another way that cis hetero relationships are held up as this is the example. This is what you should be doing. And if you do it, then you get to have all these other things.
Yes, it's very tied up into our economic system at this point. Do you have thoughts on marriage, Colin, or relationships, or is
Yeah.
this a trend
Well,
you've walked in?
yeah, the sermon that I gave just this past Sunday was called "The Gift of Friendship," and so I definitely spoke on the subject of how important friendships are, and and how sacred they can be, and just acknowledging what you're very much along the same lines you were saying, Sage, about it doesn't have to just be a married union. It's all the sacred relationships that we have, and we could call them by different names or experience them in different ways. And I very much recognize that for most of the history of being queer, being in an official marriage was not an option. And so we've had centuries of the lived experience of creating our own relationships as best as we can, and I've met some folks that are the most miserable folks, and they're in legal marriages. And then I've met people who never legally were married, but were lifelong partners, and they're incredibly happy. And so I think it just really depends on the relationship and the folks involved. And I've been very lucky in my counseling practice to I've stopped saying marriage counseling or couples counseling. I say relationship counseling now because I've had so many clients that are polyamorous. And there's something really special about having 3 or 4 or 5 folks in the room with you, and they're all connected willingly and consensually and in this loving union. And that may seem incredibly bizarre or unconventional to people who are in the more traditional mindset, but I find that beautiful just to witness that and to be in the same room and to help support people in the healing of those connections. So I love the variety, and I think that the variety is something that's very much unique to our community.
Yeah. And it really, I mean, as somebody who currently is in a very traditional marriage with a man who is in the process of kind of deconstructing what is your role and what is my role and what is our energy, and really trying to peel off like a lot of layers of expectations of how this is supposed to go. I feel like the queer community and those who have created relationships outside of the bounds, it's just, I think there's learning for everyone. I don't think anyone wants to keep doing this the way it's always been done. Like it's been kind of, at least if you have,
There's a small population that does.
Okay, there is a population
that does.
There is a small population.
We can name that.
Okay, we should name that. Yes, and there are so many options, and it requires it does require more work. I think that's my takeaway. I think it does require more work to be intentional. And I mean, polyamory, I think you must be pretty evolved to be able to do that and make all of those agreements and negotiations, and it's cool that people are paving new ways to be in intentional relationship, because it does feel like, and this is where you're heading off to Bernathen, like we are coming from the Swedenborgian context. Like Swedenborg did have, obviously he was in the 1700s, he had a pretty, he did not have a pride flag, right? He had a particular view of sexuality and relationship that was binary, and he spoke very much about the masculine and the feminine, right? These like cosmic energies, which I'd be curious to hear from all of you. I have not yet met a queer person who doesn't have some acknowledgement of these energies. Like they may be a different mix, they may be off, but these are the energies of life, sort of the receptive energy and the active energy, whatever you want to call it, and that there's a flow between them that's alive and that's real and that needs expression and balance and all of that, in a healthy relationship, and has been out of balance for a long time with the sort of suppression of the feminine for so many millennia. So anyway, I just bring that up, that I think there is a way to read Swedenborg and what he's talking about. And he also has quite a high level view of an egalitarian marriage that probably didn't really exist in his time, of where there would be equal partners, in this mix of energy. So I think there is a way to be inspired by what he shared and recognize he saw what he could see from his time. I always like to remind people, somebody asked him to write that book, Conjugal Love. It wasn't necessarily God, it was his peers. So there was a way in which he was speaking to the people of his time. And it doesn't mean we need to throw it all out. But I wonder what your thoughts are on that, kind of the masculine and the feminine as sort of cosmic principles. Does that feel like something that's important to talk about within the queer community? Are there some people in the queer community that want to there might be a cooler way to think about this? Is it too binary? What are your thoughts on that aspect of?
I think it's an important element of our theology, to acknowledge. And I think it's also important to acknowledge the historical limitations, and also even the way in which, by the time Swedenborg writes Conjugal Love, and I have my copy of it here, he becomes way more strict and gender essentialist in Conjugal Love than he does when he starts making references to the masculine and feminine energies, like in Secrets of Heaven. Right. So it's like right off the bat with Adam and Eve in the garden, that's where he's first talking about these energies. And I feel like there's more of a flow of those energies in those earlier works. By the time he gets to writing this book, which, as you said, he was asked to write this, this feels very much like it's meant to be a manual, like, let's find out exactly how a marriage is supposed to feel and be like in this very kind of, coded way. And I don't know. I think it's good to remind ourselves, like, just within the tradition, within his own writings, that there's more of a free flow happening, I think. It's possible to view it that way. But also, and maybe someone else could say more about this, but I also try to stay away from feeling like we have to be binary about things. I think it's good to be reminded that we don't need to necessarily get fixated on masculine, feminine when talking about these energies, if that makes sense. So I just want
that there's something in between, or maybe even
a mixture or something in between, or neither,
neither.
All of the above. Yeah. I think we just need to be open to that,
Yeah.
Oh man, I feel like a bobblehead because I'm just sitting here nodding along this whole time. I have so many thoughts on this because, once again, this context I'm heading into, that book,
people really care about this.
It is elevated to a ludicrous degree. So trying to minister to people here, I can't just go, oh, don't worry about that book. You don't have to pay any attention to it at all, which is a very valid option, right?
Very valid.
Like, anybody can just be like, I don't really use that book. I don't find it useful. That's not going to work here, because people are going to have damage to unpack. They're going to have questions. They're going to basically demand, like, I have to prove that women can be in the pulpit and that Conjugal Love is true. Right. And their faith is not going to be sustained without reconciling these things. And then you throw LGBTQ in it and they're like, ah. And the thing I started doing, and this is going to take me years, and I'm very interested in help. If anybody is like, this is an interesting project, I got a PDF of I think it's the Gladys translation, because I wanted to get the most recent language. Right. And the Dole one isn't out yet. And I literally have been doing like find, replace, trying this out, and it gets so clunky, and then you have to go back and edit it big time, but trying out replacing male with intellect and female with will, and then just rereading it and going, what does this sound like now? And it is remarkable what it does. I mean, aside from you have to get through the grammar because it makes it really unintelligible at first. But my working title is The Integrated Mind, because when I'm reading it as this is describing just me and my often pulling in different directions, what I think and what I want, right? And that feels fairly universal, that we all experience times that you're like, I should go to bed. I want to continue to watch silly television, right? I should eat my vegetables, but I want to eat my ice cream, right? And getting those parts of us into alignment in a really healthy and integrated way. And of course, I'm just talking silly examples, but like it's deeply true right down to addiction recovery, um, recovery from behaviors that are really, really harmful to ourselves and others. And I've found it a really fruitful way to read it. And if you're reading the original text or a translation of the original and trying to just insert that as you go, it's really hard to do because it's all he, male, male, she, female, female, right? Like it's just so embedded in the content. And so it's a really interesting project, and it's going to take me years and years and years, but I'm going to keep plugging away at when I have the time, because I think that's a really fruitful direction to go and be like, this is a book on mental health care. Like that's what this is. This is how this can be useful. And of course, it gets all into the weeds when you're talking about second marriages and, these sorts of things. But I'm like, this will be a really interesting thing to tackle. And some of it may just be like, yeah, this you can't really do that with this. And that's where you can sort of get into, it was written for a time and a place and a context. And I think that's something that we should, you guys have already elevated how important it is to put it in that context. And in the general church where I grew up, you don't do that, like ever, with any scripture, with any Swedenborg. You don't put it in that light. It's just not how you do it. And I've been grateful that I'm at a Lutheran seminary where the gospel studies and the scripture studies, they're starting with, well, this is who we think wrote this down and the year we think it was written down, and digging into all of it in a way that I'm like, this is a useful lens to bring to any and all sacred scripture. It doesn't invalidate it, but it gives it context that's really important for then bringing to our interpretation of it today. And marriage love or conjugal love, however you want to call it, is no exception to that. So.
But I would recommend you speak to Sarah Walker. I just had a conversation with her recently where she was talking about these principles. You're definitely not the only one who has tried to reform that book. And so a lot of people have done some good work on it. And I think the other point I would bring out is like there's context, but then there's also like, okay, of the things that have to do with faith, what's the most important? I mean, Jesus was kind of big on like naming the most important thing. Like I think, and I when I hear people getting into the weeds about this stuff, I think that's kind of what happens is we lose sight of the most important thing is that we love each other. What happens if we start there and meet the person in front of us? I've appreciated some of the new Pope's statements about this. Like maybe we shouldn't start with policing sexuality. Maybe that's not the most important thing, maybe there are things that are more important. And for whatever reason, humans do like to get in the weeds. And when and this will be another Be Honest conversation is, would Swedenborg be a fan of this? Like, was this really his idea that he would write all these books and then we would get into the weeds with them? He was trying to point us to something. He was pointing us to a new church, a new way of being. He was pointing out that all words are appearances, right? And that the truth is deeper than that. And yet it's just something that we humans do when we get a lot of books around us and we form an organization. It's almost making me think about what you said, Colin, about marriage. Like, people who are married and miserable, people who are not married and eternally bound, together, that we can't codify the church. We can't codify marriage. We can't like hold it. It's more alive and more real than marriage contracts or denominational bodies, right? Like that we can't, when we try to, we tend to get lost. We tend to get a little bit crazy. I don't know.
And dictatorial, right? And dictatorial, right? It becomes my way of understanding it is how everyone must understand it and apply it.
Yeah.
Or else.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Which kills faith.
Yeah. The core thing for me is going back to usefulness and then loving one another. And if we are loving one another in a way that is heavenly, meaning selfless, or doing the best we can to be selfless and to be empathetic and compassionate, then I think we've really achieved things, not getting lost in the theology or the metaphysics of the thing, which is sort of a paradox because, as we were just saying, Swedenborg wrote so much about theology and ideas and metaphysics, and yet there are more than one place in his writings where he basically says, you can you can get lost in overthinking these things. And the reminder of like, ground yourself again, and like, how are you living? What are you doing? Right. And I think that's a nice, I think, antidote. But I truly didn't experience the elevation of any of his writings to the extent until the first time I went to Bryn Athyn.
Mm-hmm.
And I was really surprised, to learn that Conjugal Love was a textbook that was used in, the high schools and things like this. And I was just like blown away by that. That was a slight culture shock for me as somebody who wasn't raised Swedenborgian, joined the church and then coming at it from convention's perspective. So that was a huge learning experience for me to be exposed to that elevation.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's making me think about another gift of the LGBTQIA community. There's a lot of diversity within the LGBTQIA community, which I wonder if that's part of the gift of it. Is there certainly are identities within the LGBTQIA community that have become kind of fixed or are fixed for a time, what it means to be a lesbian or what it means to be a this or what it means to be a that. And there sometimes are culture wars within the community about who does what or what's appropriate, but it still lives under an umbrella, right? It still has all those acronyms. And I think that's actually part of its strength or gift, is that the whole point is to make room for diversity, which I think maybe keeps it from that temptation of like, oh, well, now this is how it's going to be. And now this is how everybody's going to behave. Anyway, I'm just riffing on that holding of it's good to have unique identities. And it's okay to have a really unique identity of like, this is who I am, and this is what I love, and this is how I live in the world, and how to have that identity and recognize, and I'm in relationship with this person who has a different identity and moves in the world in a different way. I think that is happening within the soup of queerness. And I believe it needs to happen in the soup of humanity, right? This is just one iteration of the soup that we're all a part of, like that it affects all of us, and we're all unique, right? I might be a cis woman who has a cis husband, and my sexual expression is going to be different than my neighbor. And right, we like you said, Alex, we sort of don't even think about it when it's a cis person because we just believe it means one thing. But I think that's also the cap on that is sort of coming off, where we are recognizing that we actually all have this diversity of life in us. And that's, for some of us, that's really exciting. And for others, that's terrifying, right? That's sort of what change and more possibilities brings. It's my sense that that's what the new church is about. That the new church is about more possibilities, more freedom, and that is at odds with kind of the old church, which is you come here and you say these things and you do this in this one way. And that's like a human proclivity to want that. But there's also this other wanting that, to me, the queer community is a part of like the yeast of like this, let's take this cap off, right? Let's be bigger. Let's be more than we thought was possible.
I love that. It definitely, growing up, having been grown up in very solidly in this cisgender world projection.
Yeah.
There's all sorts of assumptions that get made, right? It's like, here's the male box, here's the female box. You must fit into them. And so having people just sort of walk past the boxes and go, you made those up, right? Okay, just checking, right? That's how it feels like queerness shows up in my life, is for people to just casually, lovingly walk by going, you can get out anytime you want. It's a wonderful disruption. And boy, do we need it. And the reality is, it's like people put themselves into their own boxes universally. We all do this in one way or another, right? And so this invitation to remember that we made up the boxes and we can unmake them up anytime.
That's scary to people who are really attached to their box.
It's terrifying. It's scary to me. I want to get rid of the boxes and it scares me, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Like,
well, and to
I catch myself in the fear and go, oh.
Yeah. Well, and to be in this conversation around faith, right? Part of us, we believe that God made this world, right? That some divine being has brought this into being. And so isn't that a part of the story of gender? And certainly we see it in the biological world. Yes, that's how this whole thing goes along. but we also see queerness in the biological world, and we also see all these other diverse expressions. So it's like God has brought this beautiful thing into being, and then we humans have, from our little tiny vantage points, right, seen one little piece and said, oh, that must be what it is, and let's really peer pressure everybody into always doing it this one way forever. And that's where the recognizing we made it up, I think, comes in. And I think I feel like as people of faith, it's exciting to hold the tension of like, yes, that is true, and there's a divine story coming into being. And they're both true. And the divine story doesn't want us to be more limited. It doesn't want us to be stuck in these boxes. And and this is what's funny to me about Bernathen is, I mean, I think that's so obvious in Swedenborg, right? He's like, there's something new coming. It's going to be totally different than anything you've ever experienced before. How could we think it would be like a bunch of boxes? It just feels, anyway, holding the divine story and the human story, having that humility, that courage.
Well, and I'm in this place of and it's not a hard thing for me to do. I can have compassion for the boxes that people built and then climbed into themselves and then tried to impose on others, right? And it is an acknowledgement of that fear and the very real need that we all have for safety and security.
Yes.
And, we started at this conversation of what makes people feel safe. And for some people, what makes them feel safe is consistency and things never, ever changing. And yet you look at the studies and the research on resilience, and it's by doing things that are new and scary that we build resilience. And so I feel like what we're seeing, not just in Bernathen, but in the world, is people who don't have resilience because they've had a privileged life that protected them from difference and from change, being exposed to difference and change, and then not having compassionate, loving ushers, I don't know, people to welcome them, ministers, to welcome them into difference and diversity and change, because it's scary. Think of a newborn baby, right? They've just come out of this warm, dark, cozy space through a painful process into bright, loud, cold. It's terrifying, right? You don't have to make babies cry. They just do.
Yeah.
And that's what so many people are going through when their sense of the right way to do things gets changed. And because we don't have a good way of like, let me hold your hand. You're going to be okay. You're going to survive this. I promise. Anyway.
And that's like the biblical story, right? Like that's the journey of regeneration, right? Like that's every sacred story is like the hero having to leave the cave. I think I hear you, Tira, and I think you're naming something really important. And that's what we need to do is hold each other through these processes. And that's part of what queerness does. I mean, because queer kids are born everywhere, every day, every minute, right? They into any family, they just pop into existence all over the planet all the time. So it's not something we can just, people try, right? And then they cut off relationship or they excommunicate, they push away their family. And that's the scary harm that continues to occur on this planet. But there's a consequence to that in their heart and their mind, right? Now that they've had to they've chosen to make that choice. So I do think there's a confrontation that is happening to everybody, right? Nobody's immune to it. And that is the opportunity to grow, right? That's the regeneration that we're here for. And how we hold each other in that and honor our need for safety feels pretty important. And it actually kind of comes back to, again, what we talked at the beginning, like LGBTQIA people want safety too, right? Like they want to feel safe. They want to feel in containers where they can also breathe. And, all of us are a little bit scared, right? It's scary to be a human being. It's scary to navigate this life. And I think that's a good question to hold in terms of how we hold this as a church, is how to create safe spaces where we can be safe, but also encouraged to get, I don't want to have to be uncomfortable, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. I don't know what the ratio is. I don't know, 40% of the time, I guess. I don't know. But how to hold that in community. And I think that church in general probably has tipped more on the side of let's just all be really comfortable all of the time and do all of the most familiar things every single minute, But that only ends up serving a small portion of the people who aren't growing. And my sense is the reality is like most of us are growing, right? We're being confronted. We're birthing queer kids. We're having dark nights of the soul. Like we're changing. And anyway, I think that's a good question for community and church and what it is to do this work in the world. Probably also personally too, like what are the things I do that help me feel safe? And then what are the things I do where I'm stretching or I'm pushing? And am I balanced enough that I'm getting what I need to be held, but also to be growing and moving out?
Yeah. What does Swedenborg say? A few times a year, we need to do that self-examination.
Yeah.
That's how often we should be uncomfortable.
Yeah, he didn't get
If we're
that
never
uncomfortable.
uncomfortable,
That's
bad.
actually a really good point, Tara. That guy was in solitude much of the time. He was in his room writing his books. He didn't actually have a whole lot of relationships where he figured out how hard it is. I think I sometimes feels like his imprint of his lifestyle is imprinted on our church body, because he certainly went on some great inner journeys. And he did his part in the world, and Swedenborgians like to point that out. He, went to work and he went to dinner.
We don't need to knock him.
And
it is interesting. I appreciate that he didn't like push the issue when the girl he was interested in wasn't interested in him. He was like, oh, okay. But also he then, apparently never decided I'll do the hard work of finding somebody to be in a relationship with, right? And writes this whole tome that then I grew up in this group that elevates that particular book into its own high place. And you're like, guys, this could be a perfectly lovely book, but we're doing weird things with it.
He was a human being too, just like all of us, right? And I would have been buddies with him, I think. He was quirky and interesting. And I think that's part of this whole story is we're all human beings. We're all different. We're also all divine, right? We're also all beautiful children of God. And I think that's where I rest in this conversation is like how to humanize and divinize kind of all of us and all of our stories and learn from that together and feel a continuity between that truth now and these beautiful stories we've been given and these sacred texts that tell the story of other human beings who were, going along the path just like we are.
Colin, what's the line in your affirmation? God doesn't make
junk.
Yeah.
Having something like an affirmation of faith that was just so explicitly queer in nature and in language, I think it's just really powerful. I was also just thinking, Sage, when you were saying about humanity and us being divine and, our story and our experiences are because we're human. And I think about, Blake at one point being an official enrolled member of the Swedenborgian movement and then leaving it behind, intentionally walking away, but then taking what worked for him, and making his own poetry and mythology that is very much inspired by Swedenborg, but done in a new personal way for him, right? In his journey. And I think maybe that is the spirit of being Swedenborgian or being of the new church, is recognizing the things that do work, but not trapping ourselves in the old church framework or thinking like, again, that comfort of familiarity, like church has to look like this, or, because I've really have wondered, if we say we're members of the new church, like, then what is that supposed to look like? And I know that that's an ongoing conversation that you have regularly, obviously, right? But I don't know. I just think there's a lot of inspiration. I like the idea of being okay with taking some things, some elements that work, and then just leaving the rest and reinventing.
Yeah. I'm with you, Colin. I'm with you in that. And I think it's funny because we put William Blake on our website and all these people who were members for a little while, but we don't talk about the fact that they walked out and said, I don't think this is a good idea to try to become an institution.
Yeah.
And Helen Keller, certainly, she was a devotee of the writings, but didn't join, any of the churches, saw and lived her faith in her life and the way she lived with other people and the work she did. And I think it's okay to claim them because I think you're right. They are being Swedenborgian, right? They're being inspired. They're being faithful to their own relationship to God, and they're listening, and they're doing what they're called to do, right? The creativity that they're called to bring. Like, to me, that is the new church. That is the bringing that into being. And there's, yeah, so many people who have been inspired by this movement and lived it in their own way. And I think we need to do that too. Like, that's
Mhm.
that's
I
our
was gonna
job.
say, I feel like they might be doing a better job at it than those of us that are like, I mean, here I am like, please ordain me and let me be codified into this
Mhm.
organization. And maybe I'm actually kind of shooting myself in the foot. Except humans organize. We put ourselves into groups. And
Exactly.
I
it's a little
appreciate you
like
being willing to be
I
honest about
spend
that.
my
Yeah.
time I go looking for the egg carton that I fit in, right? I
Mhm.
want that.
Mhm. Mhm.
And
Yeah.
we all do.
I want that too. I mean, I think that's probably partly why we all are here. Like, we were looking for a place to belong. Alex isn't ordained, but found the church, in their community with their family, needing, we want a place to be. And I think it's awesome that the Swedenborgian Church has created places to be. I wouldn't be here with all of you if they hadn't done that. I'm so
Exactly.
grateful for that history. And so I think that's
Yeah,
part of the
same.
paradox we need to live in,
Yeah.
is that we do things and we create things, and they're always, that's not it's good that we do that. We're built to do that. But we have to be flexible. And maybe it's good that there was men and there were women and I don't know. I have a hard time saying that, but maybe it's good that there was marriage and it was a certain way. Like, maybe that was what our species needed for a period of time. But now we have new needs. We have new goals, and we have new desires that we're not willing to squelch anymore, right? We're not willing to stick
Yeah.
ourselves in boxes. And that's exciting. That's
Well, I don't know that it's like our species, because it's like
yeah.
our culture in this part of the world during this period of time. Like our
True.
species as humans have been doing all sorts of things in different ways, over all the time that we've been on the planet. But we sort of tend to look at things through the lens of what's happening here
Sure.
in this political, social environment, in this, in a colonized area and all those sorts of things. Like that really impacts what we think is the human experience or the human expectations, but it's very specific to our area,
Yeah.
That's such
Certainly.
a
I
good
mean,
point.
certainly. Yes, there's certainly been many different permutations of what it is to be a human being in different cultures and societies and times and histories. Maybe I am drawing too broad strokes to say that marriage has been a part of our species for, I guess, a while, most places, but yeah, probably not everywhere, and not in the way that we understand it today. And there's a lot right now, I think, to learn about indigenous cultures and other communities and other ways that relationship has been lived in ways that were sustaining and equitable and alive. So it's not just about learning from those who are doing it differently now. It's also about learning from those who did it differently in the past or in other places.
yeah, marriage and gender and sexuality,
Yeah.
like all of it,
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Well, and it feels like there's opportunity to look at world cultures and be like, ooh, this group did a particularly good job with this piece. And this group did a really good job with this piece. This group, and just sort of be like, we have the opportunity in this diverse world that becomes ever smaller with the addition of technology to pick and choose in a really beautiful way, which I also think is the existence of the new church, right? Is like that's what we're pointing to. And we get this I think, again, this human impulse of like, well, what it means to be Swedenborgian is this. It fits in this box right here, right? And that's what it is. And yet we've done it again. When we do that, as soon as we do that, we've done it again. And just can we view Swedenborgianism as a worldview and a lens that gives us a starting place and grow from there?
I think we can. And makes making me think there's some people who think Swedenborgian's a box. I don't know. When I think of Swedenborgianism, it's like a giant blotchy rhombus. From my experiences in
Absolutely.
convention, it's super
Absolutely.
different. So
Yeah.
what does it mean to have that? And I honestly, I mean, after coming back from Bernathen just a couple weeks ago, I can see that there's some benefits to what's happened there. Like, they all lived in the same town. Like, that's kind of cool to live in the same town and have this shared, history, the shared understanding. Like, I'd like to live in the same town with a bunch of my friends and talk about this stuff all the time. Like, and so there's a blessing, right? There's a beauty, but then there's the negative side if it becomes
The other
too
side of the
open
coin.
and too closed. And yeah, it's kind of always it's always there. We are sort of always existing in that little too far that way, a little too much this way, coming back to center.
Which describes regeneration as well.
Yeah.
And so it's like, again, this is by design.
It is by design. It is by design. Well, this has been so fabulous. I wonder, as we wrap up, a closing thought, maybe a takeaway of like a future conversation you'd like to have always looking for like where is this birthing the next thing that you might like to share as we close tonight, or something you got from the conversation that you want to mull over a little bit more.
Well, I think I'm still very much imagining what, a queer new church in that sort of space, what that's going to be looking like in the future, and I just want to say, I know I mentioned Blake multiple times in our conversation, and I want to be very clear that I said that, the example of him walking away, I don't mean to say that that's what I'm saying we need to do, but I think giving ourselves that continued permission, like he did, to use the imagination, which he considered to be a divine gift from God, to use our imagination to envision that future and what those spaces could look like for us. I think that that's the most important thing. That's a huge takeaway and something I'll be contemplating because of our conversation today.
Wonderful. And I'll probably be poking you to come talk to me about it more, because I'm totally in
Sure.
that vein. I think we are birthing the new church.
Yeah.
Right? It doesn't come through the book. It comes through the book insofar as you read the book and the ideas light up something to be true inside, and then you live it, but every generation has to reimagine this thing. And I think it's so exciting to imagine that we're all little Blakes, right? But with our own medium, right? Our own particular way of listening and then creating. So I'm glad that's in your heart and mind, Colin. That's exciting. I feel like that's what it means to be colleagues in this, is like we agree to imagine this thing together, right? More than we're going to get it right. And we're going to argue for the rest of our natural lives about how it's going to go. We're going to imagine and let us come up with different things. And like, ooh, that's interesting. Okay. Blessings. I'm going to go over here and try this, and can we still sort of be doing it together? So that's awesome. What about you, Tira?
Oh my gosh, so many thoughts. I mean, everything people say, I have a tangent thought that goes off.
Sure.
In this moment, I'll pick this one.
Okay.
I think it'd be a really interesting thing to have a deep dive conversation into repentance as a gift. And recognize the same way that, we talk to children and go, it's okay to make mistakes because we learn from our mistakes. Well, what else is repentance but that? And so but it's such a loaded word, right? Repent or you'll go to hell, right? That kind of thing. And so anyway, believe me, it was a tangent from what you said, but
connected maybe to this idea of the church changing and repenting around LGBTQ inclusion.
We have to step forward into what we're afraid of to grow and change. And in doing so, we will mess up. And it will be messy, and we'll step on each other's toes, and we'll hurt each other's feelings. And so, because that is unavoidable, we need to have skills for repair, skills for reconciliation. And what is that but the repentance process? So that's what I'm thinking of now.
Yeah, how to manage that. We're a bridge, right? Because this is a part of our human family, just like anti-racism is still very much a thing, just like gender equity is still not quite yet a thing. There's not full inclusion of LGBTQIA humans in our world yet. So we are being that bridge, and repentance is part of one of the tools for being a part of that. Yeah, navigating that discomfort. Sounds good. What about you, Alex? What's your takeaway today?
I'm just thinking about how important it is for people to be themselves as fully as they can without that without the outside expectations, the boxes, those sorts of things. And there's a lot of discomfort in doing that when you don't fit the box expectations, but it's really important to do it because then it gives other people inspiration and freedom to do so as well.
Also do it.
And I think that's the direction we need to go. I do think that's something that the queer community is bringing to a head quite a bit, of like breaking apart those expectations of gender and sexuality and how people are supposed to look and behave, and helping other people to see that they shouldn't just make assumptions based on who you think somebody's having sex with or who they are attracted to or what gender they are, that expectations are the thing that lead to lots of disappointment and upset in the world, right? Just sort of across the board. Expectations in relationships, expectations of how other people behave. And that if we can just keep breaking that apart to where we just, instead of expecting or assuming, that we just actually take at face value. Yes. Face value what's happening in front of me and not attaching all sorts of my own opinions about it to it. I don't know.
Yeah.
That's a kind of a messy thought thing, but that's what I got going on.
It's a beautiful, messy thought thing. I love your beautiful, messy thought. And I think it's at the core of all of this. And it just brings it home to me why it's like, this is what the new church is like showing up as we are. It's not just putting on your Sunday best. I mean, how can you really be loved if you're just going and like putting on a uniform to fit in with everybody else so that nobody really sees you? And then you get the wafer and then you're loved by God. Like, is that really communicating? Like, maybe there was a time when that really communicated, but I know for me, and I think for a lot of people, I want to be loved for who I am. I don't want to pretend to be something so that I get some external blessing, right? I want to be who I am. And I think that is what people who in the LGBTQIA community want to be who they are, and who they are doesn't fit in the world exactly. And so this is why we're having these conversations. And that is such a sacred thing when we can be who we are. And I think there's something very central. I would love it if all of our Swedenborgian churches would center the queer experience. Like, maybe there's something in that for all of us to learn, to center not just the queer experience, but the queerness, right? Even that term of like, there's no normal. There's no, this is what it all looks like, right? We're all a little bit queer, whatever that might mean. And it's beautiful. So
I also would like to add that I so appreciate that you all are creating spaces that are raising this up and that are centering the queer community. And just to say how important it is that, especially as someone who's transgender, non-binary, I kind of go through the world not sure whether I'm coming across people who hate me without even knowing me or whatever. So to have places that are very expressly, this is a space where we see you. We're not going to pretend that that you exist differently. We're going to see you exactly as you are and welcome you in. It's such important work. And thank you, all of you, for doing it.
Thank you, Alex. And thank you for lifting up that institutions are useful when we can build things that exist in the world. See, we're full circle. So it's all
Here we
happening.
go.
It's all good. Well, thank you guys all so much. And we'll see what comes next.
It's deliverance to be intimate, to be honest and accepted.